For many people, the hardest part of unintentional harm doesn't come right away. It comes later. It comes after the phone calls stop, after the paperwork is finished, after the casseroles are gone, after life, at least on the outside, starts to look normal again. This is often the stage where people expect to feel better. They tell themselves they should be stronger by now, that certainly enough time has passed, and that they should be able to put this behind them. And when that doesn't happen, a new layer of pain sets in. Confusion, frustration, shame. Why am I still thinking about this? Why does it still hurt so much? What is wrong with me? Now, if you're asking those questions, there's nothing wrong with you. You are in what we call in the book the later stages of pain. These stages are quieter than the early ones, but they can be just as consuming. The panic may have softened, but the weight remains. The shock may be gone, but the questions linger. The world has moved on, but something inside of you hasn't. In this stage, the pain often becomes more internalized. You may function well on the outside. You may be competent. You may be responsible. You may be dependable. People may even admire how well you've handled everything. And yet inside, you may feel hollow, tense, or perpetually guarded. This is where many people begin to struggle with chronic guilt and shame. Not the sharp guilt of the early days, but a slow, grinding sense of unworthiness. You may find yourself replaying the event repeatedly, not because you want to, but because your mind keeps searching for a version of the story where things turned out differently. If only I'd left 5 minutes earlier. If only I had checked one more thing. If only I had paid closer attention. These thoughts are not evidence that you're failing to heal. They're evidence that your mind is trying to regain a sense of control. When something terrible happens unexpectedly, the brain searches for patterns. It wants to believe that if you can just identify the mistake, you can prevent it from ever happening again. The problem is that this search often turns inward and becomes self-punishment. You may begin to define yourself by the event, not just as someone who experienced unintentional harm, but as someone who is unintentional harm. This is where identity gets tangled up in trauma. Instead of saying something terrible happened, you may start to believe, I'm terrible. Instead of seeing yourself as a whole person who made a mistake or was involved in a tragic accident, you may reduce yourself to that moment alone. And that reduction is devastating. In the latter stages of pain, people also experience a loss of meaning. Beliefs that once grounded you may feel fragile or false. Trust in yourself may feel broken. Trust in the world may feel naive. You may ask questions you never asked before. Can I trust my own judgment? Am I safe to be around others? What does it say about the world that something like this could happen? These questions are not philosophical distractions. They're existential wounds. Unintentional harm doesn't just injure bodies and lives. It injures our assumptions. It fractures the stories we tell ourselves about how things work and who we are. Meanwhile, another hallmark of this stage is isolation, not because others have abandoned us, but because we feel we're no longer easily understood. You may sit in conversations and feel disconnected. You may laugh at the right moments, but feel far away. You may stop sharing honestly because you don't want to burden anybody or reopen old wounds. Over time, that silence can harden, and silence, once again, feeds shame. Many people in this stage also struggle with anger. Anger at themselves, anger at the situation, anger at systems that failed, anger at a world that feels unfair and careless. Anger is often one of the least acceptable emotions for people who've caused unintentional harm because it can feel forbidden. How dare I feel angry? Don't I owe the world remorse, not rage? But anger is a part of grief. It doesn't cancel responsibility. It does not erase compassion. It simply tells the truth about how much was lost. When anger is denied, it often turns inward. It becomes self-contempt. It becomes depression. It becomes numbness. The latter stages of pain are also where many people begin to notice trauma symptoms like that more clearly. Sleep disturbances that never quite resolve, hypervigilance, avoidance of situations that remind you of the event, a persistent sense of threat even when nothing is wrong. You may begin to wonder if this is just who you are now. Well, it isn't. What you're experiencing is not permanent damage. It's unresolved trauma. And trauma, when given the right care, can change. One of the most important shifts in this stage is learning to distinguish between responsibility and self-annihilation. Responsibility means acknowledging what happened honestly. It means holding space for grief and loss. It means making amends where possible. Whereas self-annihilation means believing you no longer deserve to exist fully. The latter stages of pain often blur that line. You may believe that healing would be a betrayal, that joy would be disrespectful, that peace would mean you didn't care enough. But suffering endlessly does not honor the dead. It only creates more harm. This is a hard truth, and it often takes time to accept. Another challenge of this stage is that support tends to fade. Early on, people check in. Later, they assume you're fine. And asking for help months or years later can feel awkward. It can feel embarrassing. But trauma does not follow social timelines. There is no expiration date on grief. There's no deadline for healing. There's no rule that says you should be over it by now. The later stages of pain often require different kinds of support, not crisis intervention, but sustained care. Not emergency response, but long-term companionship. Not fixing, but witnessing. This is where therapy, support groups, spiritual direction, trusted companions, they can make a profound difference. It's also where compassion for yourself becomes absolutely essential. Not indulgence, not excuses, but compassion. And compassion says, this is hard, and I'm allowed to be human in it. It says, I can hold responsibility and mercy at the same time. It says, I'm more than the worst thing that's ever happened. Learning this takes practice. It takes unlearning the belief that pain is proof of goodness. It takes letting go of the idea that suffering is a moral obligation. It takes allowing yourself to imagine a future that includes meaning again. The latter stages of pain are not a failure of healing. They are a sign that something deeper is asking to be addressed, and that is not a bad thing. It means you're still alive, still aware, still capable of growth. In this next video, we will talk more directly about the emotional toll of unintentional harm, about guilt, shame, fear, and the complicated work of caring for yourself when you don't feel deserving of care. But for now, let this be enough. If you're still hurting, you're not broken. If you're still struggling, you're not weak. If you're still here, there's still work that can be done. The pain may have changed, but it has not won. And so, friends, we will keep going together.